Come with me on a journey to a forgotten community with an amazing legacy.
When the Civil War broke out in 1861, shortly after Lincoln's inauguration as America's 16th president, he made it clear that the war was about restoring the Union and not about slavery. He avoided issuing an anti-slavery proclamation immediately, despite the urgings of abolitionists and radical Republicans, as well as his own personal belief that slavery was just morally twisted. Instead, Lincoln chose to move cautiously until he could gain more support from the public to do such a thing. January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the final Emancipation Proclamation. It declared all persons held as slaves free. The proclamation also called for the recruitment and establishment of black military units among the Union forces. An estimated 180,000 African Americans went on to serve in the Army, while another 18,000 went to serve on in the Navy. General Oliver Otis Howard was given charge of the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865 with the mission of integrating the free slaves in the Southern society and politics during the second phase of the Reconstruction era. Howard took charge of labor policy, setting up a system that required free slaves to work on former plantation land under pay scales fixed by the Bureau, on terms negotiated by the Bureau with white landowners. The Bureau was primarily responsible for the legal affairs of the freedmen. He attempted to protect the Negroes from hostile conditions, but lacked adequate power and was repeatedly frustrated by President Andrew Johnson. He set up a board of white trustees that would negotiate the transfer of land for use of the freedmen in Washington, D.C. during overtly racist times, and was successful in acquiring the former Berry Plantation that was approximately 375 acres. Shortly after emancipation, General Howard oversaw two major events as Commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau that have had a lasting effect on people in Washington, D.C. and abroad. The first I'll share is not as popular as the second. In response to the critical housing needs of thousands of African Americans, General Howard and the Freedmen's Bureau helped many find shelter. In 1867, he was able to purchase a 375-acre tract of land from Julian and David Berry. Families purchased and leased 1-acre lots for prices between $125 and $300 and enough lumber to build a home. Originally known as the Berry Tobacco Plantation, the community later called itself Potomac City and then Howard Town. The name Hillsdale was finally chosen. The history of what is known today as Berry Farm Housing Project is integrally involved with the history of the United States and the history of African Americans in this nation. The oral histories speak of the large numbers of slaves who deserted the Confederacy during the Civil War or who were captured by Union forces, came or were brought to the District of Columbia as contraband and housed in barracks on Capitol Hill until General Howard purchased Berry's plantation. Soon enough, the Freedmen's Bureau began to supply food, clothing, and shelter to those caught in the social and economic limbo. During a time where there were countless land covenants that clearly designated whites-only neighborhoods and communities, Hillsdale was the first place where blacks could own land and build a stable community in the District of Columbia after emancipation. 77 other communities around the nation were modeled after Hillsdale. When Howard was brought before a congressional committee about financial misappropriation and threatened to decommission the Freedmen's Bureau, he told the story of a young man who walked from Hillsdale to Howard University every day as a testament to the community and the institution's impact on a generation of African Americans. The men and women of Hillsdale, along with General Howard, are also remembered for playing a role in founding Howard University, which was incorporated by Congress in 1867. The school was non-sectarian and open to men and women without regard to race. November 20th, 1866. Various socially concerned groups of the time met in Washington, D.C. to discuss plans for a theological seminary to train colored ministers. Interest was sufficient, however, in creating an educational institute for areas other than the ministry. The result was the Howard Normal and Theological Institute for the Education of Preachers and Teachers. On January 8, 1867, the Board of Trustees voted to change the name of the institution to Howard University. Howard served as president of the university from 1869 to 1874. He was quoted in saying, "The opposition to Negro education made itself felt everywhere in a combination not to allow the freedmen any room or building in which a school might be taught. Throughout the late 1800s, mobs of whites would occasionally burn school buildings and churches used as schools. They would flog teachers or drive them away, and in a number of cases, they murdered them. There was high public sentiment against any Negro getting an education. This goes to show the significance of building an institution that would educate African Americans." Solomon G. Brown is a great example of the excellence that came from the Hillsdale community. His story is amazing. His humble beginnings were similar to many of those raised up from poverty. His father was dead at an early age. His father died at an early age, and his mother had 6 children. He could not read, he could not write. Solomon wasn't able to attend school, but instead he went to work for Lambert Tree, who was the assistant postmaster in the city post office, and with the help of Tree, he secured a position in the city post office. He was later detailed to assist Joseph Henry, Samuel F.B. Morse, and Alfred Bell with the first magnetic telegraph system between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. He joined the staff of the Smithsonian Institution in 1852, becoming the first black employee of the Smithsonian Institution. Solomon Brown was a self-educated man, and while at the Smithsonian obtained considerable knowledge in the field of natural history, he became well known for his illustrated lectures on natural history. He lectured frequently at scientific societies in Washington, D.C., Alexandria, Virginia, and Baltimore, Maryland. Brown was also an avid poet. He had poetry readings, and his poetry was published in one of the leading African American newspapers of the day, the Washington Bee. Solomon Brown was also an activist committed to advancing his race, and in the African American community, he was a man of prominence. He lived with his wife Lucinda on Elvins Road in a section of Anacostia that was later called East Hillsdale. He founded the Pioneer Sabbath School, was superintendent of the North Washington Mission Sunday School, a member of the Freedmen's Relief Association, and a trustee of Wilberforce University and the 15th Presbyterian Church. Brown was also elected to 3 consecutive one-year terms from 1871 to 1874 as a member of the House of Delegates under the territorial government of the District of Columbia. Frederick Douglass may be one of the most well-known African Americans of his time. His story is very inspiring. Born in 1818 as a slave, he never accepted his status as a slave. He continued to escape from slavery, sometimes being caught and resold into slavery. After escaping from slavery, he became a leader of the abolitionist movement, gaining attention for his inspiring oratory skills and incisive anti-slavery writing. He became a great social reformer, lecturer, writer, and statesman. He stood as a living counter-example to slaveholders' arguments that slaves did not have the intellectual capacity to function as independent American citizens. Many Northerners also found it hard to believe that such a great orator had been a slave. Douglass would soon break the Uniontown all-white land covenant by ironically purchasing the developer John Van Hook's home on Cedar Hill. Douglas and his children were very involved and influential in the Hillsdale community. Frederick Douglass Patterson, who was named after Frederick Douglass, takes us to another success story from the Hillsdale community. He was born October 10, 1901, an orphan at the age of 2. Rumor says he may have moved in and lived with Solomon G. Brown, named after family friend and popular abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass Patterson would later become president of what is now Tuskegee University from 1935 to 1953 and founder of the United Negro College Fund. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan awarded Dr. Patterson the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor.